Everyone's a kid at heart when it comes to bunk beds. Who doesn't love them? Not only that, but a log bunk bed. Today we're going to take some old logs, a few cheap tools, a little bit of time and patience, a couple screws, and a couple 2x4s. We're going to make ourselves a lovely set of log bunk beds that are decorative, solid, easy, and cheap. My name's Dave Whipple. You're watching Bush Radical. Now, years ago, I built this tiny little cabin with a porch. I'm sure if you watch this channel, you've probably seen it. But it is tiny. It's 10 by 16, and the inside dimensions are smaller yet. We've had two cots in here, one on one wall and one on another, and it's not the ideal situation. So today I'm going to pack up the cots for the last time, get them out of the way, sweep the floor, and start a project I've been meaning to do for years, building a decorative set of log bunk beds. I'm going to build them the full length up against the end wall. That way it'll be big enough for two people to sleep and there'll be a little extra room on the end for storage. I'll get everything out of the way and start sweeping, get it cleaned up. And then we're going to do our measurements. Now I'm thinking about 2 feet wide because it's very easy to find foam material for a mattress at 2 feet wide. The cot I've been using for years is also 2 feet wide, so I figure if it's been good enough so far, might as well build the bunk beds that same size. Now down here by the well is the tree that I'm planning on using. I need to top my water off, and it's a good time to take a minute and show you what I'm looking at. Oh man, that water is fantastic. Let me show you the tree I'm looking at here. This tree blew over in a storm years ago, before I owned the property. What I'm planning on doing is getting this thing down on the ground, sawing it in half, and make 2 log faces for the bunk bed. So the bottom has a log and the top has a log, and it's more or less going to be just for decoration, but I think it'll be a good look. I've been out of water for a couple hours. I've just been putting off going and getting more, and I'm dying of thirst. A bit mosquito-y down here. Now the cabin is about 25 to 30 feet higher in elevation than this well. So when I split that log in half, it's going to be a bugger packing it up because the hill is very, very steep. I'll set my sawhorses up right over top of the fire pit, so any shavings and cutoffs and stuff, well, they'll just be a campfire later on this evening. One thing when you're splitting a log in half, whether you're using a chainsaw mill or you're doing it by eye, freehand, make sure you go through and tighten your chain. It's quite a lot of a pull on your chain ripping, and it will stretch your chain out a touch. I'd like to say milling that log went fine, but it kind of ended in tragedy. I got my chainsaw sharpened up, headed down, cut the tree all up, put it on the ground, limbed it up, set it all up to be milled in half. Spent hours milling and getting the whole thing untangled. Not only that, but it was actually quite a bit wetter than I would have assumed. It's been down a long time. Drug it back up the hill on my shoulders, spent hours peeling it off. Not only peeling it, but draw knifing it. And by the time I got to the very last section, which was the center of the second log... Okay, everybody, we have a problem here. While I was peeling the second log, this was the very last spot I peeled. And you can see it's just dry rotted. We got all the way to the very end, and then I ran into that. There's no sense in going through all that work when you know that you have bad materials to start with. Let's just go get some new logs. Well, heartbroken, depressed, and completely wore out, I spent the rest of the evening just sitting on the porch enjoying the weather. The next day, by the middle of the afternoon, I had found a good tree that was about the right size, standing dead, fire killed, very dry. I think it would be just about perfect. So that's the logs that we're going to use. I didn't just get one log, I got an extra log, because I have an idea. I don't want to just make a bunk bed with 2 log faces anymore. I want to have 2 uprights, because I think it will just look much better, and it will also give me a chance to lag it all together, log to log, and make it exceptionally solid. I went through the same process of splitting the log, using a 2x4 as a guide, and then freehand cutting it with a chainsaw. Now, if you've never tried splitting a log with a chainsaw, give it a crack sometimes. It is quick, easy, it's very intuitive, and you can turn out a pretty good cut. About halfway through the day, I ran into this guy. This is probably the biggest Sawyer beetle I've ever seen in my life. Massive. Now, you can cut a log pretty straight with a chainsaw, but you do tend to gouge it with the tip here and there. So what I'm doing is I'm taking off all the chips I can with the chainsaw and then finishing the face with an electric hand planer. The hand planer will get it just about as smooth as it needs to be. Once the face of all my logs have been planed down so they're fairly smooth, I'm going to take a 2x4, screw it down to the face of the log, and then pencil mark it and cut the very edge off with a skill saw. I go as close to the outside of the log as I possibly can. The farther in you get, you're not going to make it all the way through the log with that small blade. Now, I'm not trying to get these logs any specific width. I'm just taking the sharp edge off. I do check with a tape measure and make sure that I have the log the same width from one end to the next. But one of these ended up at 8 inches, another one 7, another one 6.5, whatever. Anywhere that the blade doesn't make it all the way through the log, I end up breaking the outside off. And then what I'll do is take a draw knife and end up cleaning whatever's left. It's actually some of the best work of the whole project. Just draw knifing off those extra little pieces. It's kind of therapeutic. Well, now that all the logs are prepped and ready to go, I need to make a couple supports for the 2x4 frames that the bunk bed's actually going to be made out of. So what I'm doing is I'm going to take a couple chunks of 2x12 and I'm going to notch out little 2x4 notches in each corner. And then I'll cut those notches out. In a couple minutes I'll be installing them and it'll be much easier just to see what they are as opposed to try to explain it. Now, I would have used the skill saw to make all these cuts, but I managed somehow to break the prong off the cord. So, we're just going to do it the old way. But it's a beautiful day out. The weather's fantastic. Now I'm in no hurry, so that's not a problem. See the 2x4 notch at the end of this block? There's going to be 2 of these blocks for each bunk. They're going to hold the 2x4s up. Now, there's going to be a 2x4 up against the wall, and that really doesn't need any support because it's going to get screwed right into the wall studs. But the 2x4 that's on the outside, well, I can't just screw it into the tongue and groove. That won't do any good at all. I need to catch a stud that's inside the wall. So using this block, I can screw into a wall stud. Now, I've had these 2x4s sitting on the porch for probably a year, just waiting for me to get off my lazy butt and get to this project. And some of them have a little bit of a warp, so I kind of have to drive them in. Once the supports are in and the 2x4s are in, I'll measure for the outside. I want to make sure that I cut them to the exact space that's there, because I want a nice snug fit. Now, before I go ahead and put these outside 2x4s on, I want to make sure that I get those inside ones completely screwed off. That way I don't have to work inside of a box. Well, I gotta say, I'm happy to be at this point, but there's really not much to look at, is there? But that's all about to change, because now that we've got the boring framing out of the way, we can get to the log work, which is always my favorite part.
This one right here is going to be my bottom log. Lovely log. I like that one quite a bit. I need to mark that at about 7 inches. I'm going to cut a flat section right here.
I'm notching out 2 flat sections, and that's where my upright logs are going to recess into. So I'm using my skill saw to make cuts about 1/2 inch apart so I can knock all those chips out. Once I've got the chips most of the way knocked out, I'll take a draw knife and pop out any of them that I can get out with the draw knife. And once I've got them all knocked out with a hammer and all knocked out with the draw knife, I'll clean anything out that's left with the chainsaw, get it as smooth as I possibly can.
Drop a couple spikes in this. And this way I can set the log and hang it over that 2x4, and then I can get some screws in it.
Now, I'm almost ready to set that log face, but first I've got to put a few screws and get them ready. So when I do set that log in there, I can just grab the screw gun and fasten it.
See that nail rests on that 2x? Gives me a minute so I can snag a screw into it. Not bad. Not too bad.
Well, just like an old blues song, second verse is the same as the first. I have to do the same exact process with the second log. Most important, I need to make sure that my notches are in the exact same spot. So measure twice, cut once. They have to be right over top of each other or the uprights, of course, won't fit in. Now the spikes that I'm setting in here, I'm using a tape measure so they're the exact same distance from the edge of the log. All they do is temporarily rest on that 2x4 and they give me a brief second where I can grab my screw gun and fasten them. And I don't have to hold the log up and try to make sure it's in the right spot while I screw it.
Well, I don't think I've got to tell you guys that there's no structural strength to this at all. The logs are held to the 2x4 with just 2 screws, and the 2x4s are held on with just 4 screws, and there's no structural integrity to that. Structural integrity. If I was to climb up on there right now, it'd probably come down. Right now, we're going to take and put on our uprights. We're going to make this thing really solid.
So I need to make sure that the uprights are flat on the bottom. I need to cut a nice, true 90-degree angle so they can sit nice and flat on the floor. And then from there, I'll measure to the other end and cut the other end off. Now I'm using my skill saw to make a cut on one side and then flipping it over to make a cut on the other. It's going to make the cleanest cut, a lot better than a chainsaw. And then I'm using the draw knife to make a nice decorative bevel at the top of these logs. Now it's time to break out the big guns, log screws, the manliest of all construction screws. Now the logs can take these screws fine, but the 2x4 might not be able to, so we're going to pre-drill all our holes. Now the idea here is we're going to run those log screws through the 2x4, through the face log, and into the upright. So everything is going to be sandwiched together.
Whoa. Yeah, that's a bite.
Now the outside 2x4, the face log, and the upright are all sandwiched together and they're rock solid. But really all that's holding all of it on is just the screws through that 2x4 into that support bracket. So it's still really not that solid. It's solid up and down, but you could pull it right away from the wall very easily. But when we deck this, the plywood is going to go from the outside 2x4 to the one that's lagged to the wall, holding it all together rock solid.
That is so rock solid, man. It ain't going nowhere.
Now we can put in our second upright. I had to trim just a fuzz off of the top corner because it was just touching the ceiling just a little tiny bit. Once again, we're going to pre-drill our holes, switch our bits, and then run in those spring steel log screws. Over the years, I've built 2 log cabins and I've built 2 log homes, and I've used log screws for every one of them. They're fantastic. And not only that, but you can find a million things to do with a log screw. Other than nuts and bolts, they're about the best way to fasten 2 big chunks of wood together. Well, I think it's turning out lovely. Ultimately, I will stain these logs, but I plan on doing it right before I leave one of these days, so I don't have to smell that log stain smell. I can also leave the windows open while I'm gone. I'll make sure to stuff these 2x4s full of screws before I move on to the next part and pull those spikes out. Now we can set in our plywood bed bottoms. Now I'm just using regular 1/2-inch CDX plywood because that's what I have. And of course, what's a project without some sheetrock screws? So that's what we're using to fasten down our plywood. Good old-fashioned 1 5/8 sheetrock screws. Now you can see I have a light strip on the ceiling that just goes to a power station. I also have another string of lights, so I'm going to take a couple of those lights and screw them up underneath this lower bunk, just to help light that area. Lovely. Now I plan on stopping by a Hobby Lobby or Joann Fabric or something like that and get some thick 2-foot wide foam pads for mattresses. But for tonight, I'll just use the mattress pad from the cot. Along with my super thick, cozy Arctic sleeping bag, I'm pretty much set for tonight. Man, I think that turned out just fine. Sure makes this cabin look a lot nicer too. Rustic log furniture just seems to set a cabin off and gives it that lodge feeling. Even if you did build it for next to nothing with a dead tree from the backyard and a few cheap tools. Oh, this is so nice.
Well, that about wraps it up. If you've ever wanted to build your own set of bunk beds, I hope this gives you some ideas. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you the next time. My name's Dave Whipple. You've been watching Bush Radical. Be radical, eh? See you soon.